A few weeks ago, I emailed a Rorealis award-winning and best-selling author, James Islington, the author of a handful of books, including one of my new favorite books, The Will of the Many, and he actually replied. Well, technically his assistant emailed me back with his response, shout out to Elizabeth, but still, absolutely crazy that he replied. Anyway, I told him I have a small YouTube channel where I help people write their stories, and I asked him what's one piece of world-building advice he'd give to someone trying to write their first fantasy or sci-fi novel. I'll share his full response, and then we'll break it down a bit. It's a little long, but it's worth every second. He says, "In my writing, I'm very plot-focused, and it's fair to say that my worlds have evolved largely out of that. Particularly when I was writing the first books in each series, The Shadow of What Was Lost and The Will of the Many, if I had a great idea for a plot point, but it clashed with the setup of the world, I would invariably choose to bend the world to fit the story, rather than the other way around. For the following books, that isn't always possible, of course, but I still do it where I have wiggle room. To me, at least, fantasy worlds are only ever as interesting as the stories that can be told in them. So that just seemed like the natural way to do things. It is sometimes frustrating, for better or worse. It's another reason I have such an intensive revision process. But I do think that constant tweaking of the world, giving it details that are relevant to the plot rather than them just being there as window dressing, really helps give it its depth. So as much work as it is, it's an approach I'm sticking with." I love this advice because it prioritizes the story over the world, which I think is the correct order. A novel is a story, not facts about a world, no matter how interesting that world may be. When James Islington said, "If I had a great idea for a plot point, but it clashed with the setup of the world, I would invariably choose to bend the world to fit the story, rather than the other way around," it reminded me why I don't particularly love making detailed character sheets for my characters. If I'm writing about a girl who lives in a fire watchtower in the near post-apocalyptic future, I don't need to know what her favorite cereal is, unless it becomes relevant for the story. In fact, if I'm filling out a character sheet, I might put her favorite cereal as Lucky Charms. But when I get into the story, it might make more sense for it to be Cheerios. And it's an easy decision to me, and this is a silly example, but you get the idea. There's no reason to write yourself in a corner with excessive world building. Let your world building flow naturally from your story. There's one line in his response that is foundational when you set out to build a world for your novel. Islington says, "Fantasy worlds are only ever as interesting as the stories that can be told in them." Yes, spend time writing detailed histories and languages of the different cultures in your world. Yes, spend time crafting the religion and politics of your world. Yes, spend time geeking out about the magic systems. But these world-building details are not the story. Fantasy worlds are only ever as interesting as the stories that can be told in them. So, build your worlds, but don't forget to spend even more time crafting your story. Until next time, jump, build, fly. This video's featured indie book is Oath of the Survivor by James Meyer. When the apocalypse strikes the world Kyle Mayhew calls home, he is thrust into a struggle for survival. Alongside his drone, he will have to overcome mutated creatures, ruthless marauders, and his grandfather's legacy to carve out a new home. Pick up your copy of Oath of the Survivor today.